Whatever people say about the Tiger tank, whether they call it overrated, unreliable, or a mechanical nightmare, there is one thing almost everyone agrees on. It looks terrifying. Even today. Even sitting still in a museum under bright lights. 80 years later, it still has that effect. And that's interesting, because we're not talking about numbers. Not armor thickness. Not gun penetration charts. Not how many tanks it destroyed. We're talking about something simpler and deeper. The way it looks. The feeling you get before you even start thinking. When the Tiger I first entered combat in 1942, it immediately stood out. It appeared near Leningrad on the Eastern Front and later in North Africa. Wherever it went, it left an impression. Soldiers wrote about it. Commanders warned their men about it. Training films showed its outline again and again. Yes, it had a powerful 88mm gun. Yes, its armor was thick for its time. But firepower alone doesn't explain why people still feel something when they see one today. Other tanks had strong guns. Other tanks had heavy armor. Only the Tiger has that presence. Start with its size. The Tiger I weighed about 57 tons. At a time when many tanks weighed 30 to 35 tons, that was massive. It was over 8 meters long from the tip of the gun barrel to the back. It was wide, almost a full meter wider than an American Sherman. It was tall enough that most men standing beside it would have to look up at the turret. Stand next to a Sherman and you see a large vehicle. Stand next to a Tiger and it feels like you're standing next to a small building. But size alone doesn't explain the feeling either. Lots of things are big without being intimidating. Buses are big. Construction equipment is big. They don't make you take a step back. So what's different? The answer has a lot to do with shape. Human beings react to shapes in ways we don't always notice. Sharp angles, hard edges, and flat surfaces tend to make us feel alert. Sometimes tense. Rounded shapes feel softer, calmer, more approachable. Think about smooth stones in a river. Think about round fruit. Think about the curve of a shell. Now think about broken glass. A knife blade. Jagged rocks. Sharp corners. Even if we don't say it out loud, our brains read angles as potential danger. That reaction goes back thousands of years. In nature, sharp shapes often meant something that could hurt you. Now look at the Tiger. The turret is basically a box. Not rounded like the Sherman's turret. Not smoothly curved like many Soviet tanks. The Tiger's turret was made from flat steel plates welded together at near-perfect right angles. The hull is the same story. Flat front plate. Flat side plates. Hard edges where everything meets. Very little curvature anywhere on the vehicle. It doesn't flow. It doesn't curve. It doesn't look fast. It looks solid. It looks stubborn. It looks like it was carved from a single block of steel. Where a Tu-34 has sloped armor that makes it look like a wedge slicing forward, the Tiger looks like a wall. The Tu-34 feels like it wants to charge. The Tiger feels like it's already there and not moving. That difference matters. A fast shape feels dangerous in one way. A heavy, unmoving shape feels dangerous in another way. The Tiger feels immovable. And here's the surprising part, the engineers didn't design it to be scary. They were solving practical problems. Germany in 1941 and 1942 was under intense pressure. They needed a heavy tank that could deal with Soviet armor like the Tu-34. They didn't have unlimited time or unlimited industrial resources. Casting large curved armor pieces, like the Americans often did for the Sherman, required specialized equipment and complex processes. Flat armor plates were easier to produce. You could roll them, cut them, weld them together using tools German factories already had. Flat plates were practical. So the Tiger's boxy shape wasn't a psychological trick. It was a manufacturing decision. There was also the issue of space. The Tiger carried a 5-man crew. It carried around 90 rounds for its 88mm gun. It needed a large turret ring to mount that gun. Sloped armor, like the Soviets used on the Tu-34, saves weight and improves ballistic protection, but it also eats up interior space. If you angle a plate, you reduce the room inside the tank. The Tiger's designers chose interior space over heavy sloping. They needed room for the crew to operate. They needed space for ammunition. They needed space for a large engine. So they used more vertical plates. Again, practical choice. But visually, vertical plates create a flat, upright face. And a flat, upright face looks confrontational. Then there are the tracks and wheels. The Tiger was heavy. To keep from sinking into mud, it needed wide tracks. To fit those tracks and still be transportable by rail, engineers used overlapping road wheels along the side. Functionally, it helped distribute weight. But visually, it created a dense wall of steel along the lower half of the tank. On a Sherman, you can see gaps between the road wheels. It looks mechanical, almost light by comparison. On a Tiger, the wheels overlap in layers. From the side, it looks packed. Thick. Solid. Almost like the entire vehicle is one continuous mass. There's no visual lightness. No space to breathe. Just steel from top to bottom. And our brains read that density as weight. We read weight as power. Think about animals for a second. A wolf is frightening because it looks fast. A rhino or an elephant is frightening because it looks unstoppable. The Tiger falls into that second category. It doesn't look agile. It looks unstoppable. That's a different kind of fear. It's not panic. It's pressure. Imagine being a soldier in 1944, seeing that shape emerge from behind a hedge or through smoke. A tall, flat-faced machine with a long gun pointing straight ahead. The engine rumbling. The tracks grinding forward. Even before a shot is fired, the shape communicates something. It doesn't look like it's trying to get somewhere quickly. It looks like it has arrived. And that arrival feels heavy. The Tiger II, or King Tiger, pushed this even further. It was even heavier, over 70 tons. It had thicker armor. Its turret was more angular. The front plate was sloped more sharply, but still massive. It didn't look sleek. It looked like a giant slab of steel leaning forward. The gun was longer, extending far past the front of the hull. When pointed straight ahead, it made the tank look like it was already reaching out to hit something. Again, these features were about protection and firepower. But visually, they added to the sense of dominance. Now compare that to the Sherman. The Sherman's hull often had rounded cast sections. Its turret was curved. The surfaces flowed into each other. It looked practical. Reliable. Built for mass production. It looked like a tool. The Tiger didn't look like a tool. It looked like a fortress on tracks. The Soviet Tu-34 looked aggressive and fast. The Sherman looked balanced and practical. The British Churchill looked tall and steady but not especially threatening. Only the Tiger looked implacable. That word fits it well. Implacable. It doesn't look emotional. It doesn't look rushed. It doesn't look desperate. It looks like it doesn't care. And that cold, flat, geometric shape is what people still react to today. Even in a museum, when it's silent and painted and harmless, people often describe the same feeling. You walk up to it, and the scale hits you first. It's bigger than you expected. The flat plates catch the light and create sharp shadows. The edges are clean and hard. You find yourself standing still for a second. Maybe even taking half a step back without thinking about it. That reaction isn't about wartime propaganda. It's not about internet myths. It's about how humans read shape and mass. The Tiger wasn't designed to intimidate. It was designed to survive. But surviving, in this case, happened to look like a giant block of steel with right angles and a massive gun. And that accidental combination created one of the most visually intimidating machines ever built. That's why, all these years later, people still feel something when they see it. Not because of the numbers. Because of the shape. To really understand why the Tiger felt so different, you have to put it next to the tanks it fought against. On its own, it's just a big machine. But in contrast with other tanks of World War II, its shape becomes even more powerful. Let's start with the American M for Sherman. The Sherman was the workhorse of the Western Allies. It was reliable, easier to produce, easier to repair, and built in huge numbers. But visually, it tells a completely different story. Many Sherman variants had rounded cast hulls. The M for A1, for example, had smooth curves flowing from the front plate into the sides. The turret was rounded too, almost dome-like. Even when the Sherman had welded plates instead of cast sections, the overall design still felt softer than the Tiger. Nothing about the Sherman looks aggressive in a brutal way. It looks practical. It looks balanced. It looks like a machine built to do a job efficiently. If the Sherman were a person, it would be a factory worker with rolled-up sleeves. Dependable. Focused. Built for endurance. Now imagine parking a Sherman next to a Tiger. The Sherman suddenly looks smaller, lighter, almost compact. Its curves make it feel more human-sized. The Tiger, with its flat vertical sides and heavy overhangs, looks like it doesn't belong in the same category. It feels oversized. It feels excessive. And that excess creates intimidation. Then there's the Soviet Tu-34. The Tu-34 shocked German forces in 1941. It had heavily sloped armor, which made it harder to penetrate. The front glacis plate was angled sharply. Its turret was rounded. Its suspension gave it a low, aggressive stance. The Tu-34 doesn't look like a wall. It looks like a spear. Everything about its design suggests forward motion. The slope of the armor creates a sense of speed even when it's standing still. It looks like it wants to rush toward you. That's a different kind of threat. The Tu-34 feels dangerous because it looks fast and determined. The Tiger feels dangerous because it looks slow and unstoppable. One feels like a charging animal. The other feels like a fortress that learned how to move. Even the British Churchill tank tells a different visual story. The Churchill had a tall, narrow hull and long track runs that wrapped high along its sides. It almost looked stretched. Its edges were rounded. It had character, but not dominance. The Churchill looks sturdy. It looks like it can climb over obstacles. But it doesn't feel overwhelming. The Tiger overwhelms. Now think about how this difference would feel on a battlefield. Imagine you're a Sherman crewman in Normandy in 1944. You've trained to recognize enemy tanks. You've seen pictures. You've been told about the Tiger. You know its gun can knock you out at longer ranges than you can effectively respond. Then, through smoke and dust, you see a large, boxy shape appear. You don't measure it calmly. You don't calculate armor angles in your head. You react. The wide hull. The flat front plate. The tall turret with that long 88mm gun. Your brain fills in the rest. Even if the vehicle in front of you isn't actually a Tiger, that silhouette triggers something. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. Because there weren't that many Tigers. Around 1,347 Tiger I tanks were built. Fewer than 500 Tiger II tanks were produced before the war ended. That's under 2,000 vehicles total. Compare that to over 49,000 Shermans. Or tens of thousands of T-34s. The Tiger was rare. But if you read Allied battle reports from 1943 onward, you would think Tigers were everywhere. Units reported fighting Tigers constantly. In some areas, soldiers claimed to encounter more Tigers than actually existed in the entire theater. How is that possible? Misidentification. Under the stress of combat, many German tanks were reported as Tigers, even when they weren't. Panzer IVs, which were much more common, were often mistaken for Tigers. Later models of the Panzer IV had added side armor plates that made them look bulkier. In smoke, at distance, under pressure, they could look similar enough. Even turretless assault guns like the Stu G3 were sometimes called Tigers in reports. It wasn't because soldiers were foolish. It was because the Tiger had become the mental image of the ultimate threat. Training films showed its silhouette. Briefings warned about it. Stories spread from unit to unit. The Tiger became the monster of the battlefield. So when a soldier saw something large and German and boxy, the brain made a quick decision. Tiger. That decision affected behavior. If you believe you are facing a tiger, you act differently. You might call for air support. You might hesitate. You might reposition carefully instead of pushing forward. You treat it as a top-level threat. That hesitation costs time. Sometimes it costs momentum. The Tiger didn't even need to be physically present to influence the battle. Its image was enough. That's powerful. That's design doing psychological work. Now, to be fair, the Tiger was not perfect. It was heavy. Its engine was often overworked. The transmission required careful handling. The overlapping road wheels could freeze solid in mud and ice on the Eastern Front. Experienced Allied crews learned how to deal with Tigers. They aimed for the flanks. They used mobility. They worked in teams. The Tiger's myth was strong, but it wasn't magic. Still, the visual impact never faded. And that impact shows up even today. Look at video games like World of Tanks or War Thunder. Millions of players grind through lower-tier vehicles just to unlock the Tiger. Not because it's always the strongest in game terms, but because of what it represents. It looks powerful. It feels powerful. Model kit companies know this too. Tiger tank model kits have been bestsellers for decades. People love building them, painting them, displaying them. In movies, when directors want to show a terrifying German tank, they almost always choose the Tiger. In Saving Private Ryan, the Tiger seen in the film was actually a modified Soviet Tu-34 made to look like one. Why? Because audiences associate that boxy, flat silhouette with menace. In Fury, the filmmakers went even further and used a real Tiger Eye, Tiger 131, from a museum. They didn't want a replica. They wanted the real shape. Because nothing else looks quite like it. That tells you something. The Sherman helped win the war in Western Europe. The Tu-34 played a massive role in defeating Germany on the Eastern Front. Strategically, those tanks mattered more. But visually? The Tiger became the icon. Ask someone who knows nothing about tanks to draw one. They'll probably draw a boxy shape with a big straight gun sticking out front. Without realizing it, they'll draw something closer to a Tiger than to a Sherman or Tu-34. That's how strong the silhouette became. And it all comes back to those flat plates, those right angles, that dense wall of wheels, that sense of weight. The Tiger doesn't look like it's asking permission to be there. It looks like it owns the ground it's standing on. That's not an accident of history. It's the power of shape. Now let's move away from the battlefield for a moment and talk about what happens when the Tiger is standing still. Because something strange happens when you see one in real life. Photos don't prepare you. Videos don't prepare you. Even documentaries don't fully capture it. The scale, the weight, the presence, it's different when you're standing a few feet away. Take Tiger 131 in the Bovington Tank Museum in England. It's the only running Tiger Eye left in the world. It was captured in North Africa in 1943 after a British shot jammed its turret. The crew abandoned it, and it was eventually shipped back to Britain. Today, it sits inside a large museum hall, surrounded by other tanks. But when people walk into that room, something happens. They slow down. Even with Shermans, Churchills, and other vehicles nearby, the Tiger draws attention first. It's not painted in dramatic colors. It's not moving. It's not firing. It's just sitting there. And yet it feels different. The flat plates catch the overhead lights and create sharp shadows. The edges are clean and hard. The turret sits heavy and blunt on top of the hull. The gun points forward at about chest height for an adult. You don't just look at it. You feel it. Visitors often say the same thing, it's bigger than I expected. But it's not just about size. It's about how that size is shaped. A Sherman next to it looks rounded and mechanical. The Tiger looks architectural. It feels less like a vehicle and more like a structure. That's why some people compare it to brutalist buildings, those massive concrete government structures built after the war, with hard lines and heavy forms. They're not curved or friendly. They're blocky, bold, and unapologetic. The Tiger has that same energy. It doesn't look designed to be liked. It looks designed to endure. And that endurance is what your brain reads as dominance. Now think about this. The Tiger was not built in huge numbers. It was expensive. It was complicated. It demanded a lot from Germany's already strained industry. But it achieved something very few machines ever achieve. It became a symbol. Even people who don't know much about World War II often recognize the Tiger tank. They may not know its specifications. They may not know where it fought. But they know the shape. That shape has been printed on posters, featured in films, built as toys, recreated in video games, and displayed in museums for decades. Why did this tank, out of all the tanks of the war, become the icon? Because its design is simple and bold. It doesn't have flowing lines. It doesn't have complex curves. It doesn't need decoration. It's a rectangle with a gun. But that rectangle is so solid, so clear, so confident in its shape, that it becomes unforgettable. When a filmmaker wants to show a dangerous German tank, they choose the Tiger. In Saving Private Ryan, they went through the effort of modifying other vehicles just to recreate that shape. In Fury, they used a real Tiger 131 because the director understood something important: the real silhouette carries weight on camera. It fills the frame. It makes actors look smaller. It changes the mood of the scene without anyone saying a word. That's design power. And here's another important point: the Tiger doesn't look complicated. Yes, mechanically it was complex. Yes, internally it was full of engineering challenges. But visually, it's very simple. Flat front plate. Flat sides. Box turret. Long straight gun. That simplicity makes it strong. Think about logos. The most powerful logos are often simple shapes. Clean lines. Bold forms. Easy to recognize from a distance. The Tiger's silhouette works the same way. From far away, in smoke, through trees, you can recognize it. And once soldiers learned what it was, that recognition became emotional. It became fear. But here's something important. The fear wasn't permanent. As the war went on, experienced Allied crews learned how to fight Tigers effectively. They studied weak points. They practiced flanking maneuvers. They used teamwork and numbers. The Tiger was dangerous, but it wasn't invincible. And yet, even after soldiers learned how to defeat it, the image stayed strong. That tells you something. The psychological impact of the shape lasted longer than the tactical advantage of the machine. And that's rare. Usually, when a weapon loses its battlefield advantage, it loses its reputation. But the Tiger's reputation became separate from its actual performance. It entered culture. Model builders love it because it looks impressive on a shelf. It dominates space even at small scale. Video game players choose it because it feels powerful. It looks like something you worked hard to unlock. Even children drawing tanks often draw something boxy and heavy, with a long straight barrel. They don't realize they're echoing a design from 1942. But they are. The Tiger became the mental picture of tank. And again, that comes back to geometry. Curves can feel friendly. Slopes can feel dynamic. But flat vertical walls feel final. A slope tank feels like it might move quickly. A flat-faced tank feels like it's standing its ground. The Tiger stands its ground even when it's parked. Even rusting outdoors in a small European town square, like the abandoned King Tiger in Belgium, it still looks serious. Children walk past it. People sit near it. But the machine doesn't look playful. It still looks heavy. It still looks like it means business. That's not because of propaganda. It's not because of myths online. It's because human beings react to mass and angles in predictable ways. Right angles suggest structure. Flat plates suggest resistance. Thickness suggests protection. When you combine all three in one enormous object, you get presence. And presence is powerful. The engineers who designed the Tiger were trying to solve practical wartime problems. They needed space for a 5-man crew. They needed to mount a powerful gun. They needed armor thick enough to survive enemy fire. They chose flat plates because they were easier to manufacture. They chose vertical walls to maximize interior space. They chose wide tracks and overlapping wheels to handle the weight. All practical choices. But when you put all those practical solutions together, you get something that looks like a moving fortress. And that fortress look is what stuck. 80 years later, people still argue about whether the Tiger was worth its cost. They debate reliability. They compare production numbers. But nobody debates the feeling. Stand in front of one, and you understand. It doesn't need to move. It doesn't need to fire. It just needs to exist. And that existence still makes people pause. Now let's talk about something important. Was the Tiger's sparey look actually useful in war? Did that intimidating shape really matter once the shooting started? Because it's easy to get carried away with the myth. The Tiger looks powerful. It feels powerful. But war is not decided by feelings alone. It's decided by fuel, logistics, numbers, reliability, and strategy. And this is where the story becomes more balanced. There's no doubt that early encounters with Tigers shocked Allied forces. When they first appeared, especially in places like Tunisia in 1943, they caused real fear. Reports came in describing tanks that couldn't be penetrated from the front. Guns that could knock out enemy vehicles at longer ranges. That shock was real. One famous example often mentioned is Villers Bocage in June 1944. A small group of Tiger tanks ambushed British forces moving through the town. In a short period of time, several British vehicles were destroyed. The sudden appearance of these heavy tanks caused confusion and panic. But here's the key point. It wasn't just the gun that shocked people. It was the presence. Imagine a narrow European street. Stone buildings on both sides. Suddenly, a massive, flat-faced tank rolls into view. The front plate fills the road. The long 88mm gun slowly turns. That visual alone changes the atmosphere. It feels like the situation just became heavier. Even before the first shot. That moment, the first sight of the Tiger, often had a psychological effect that went beyond its actual numbers. But war doesn't freeze in one moment. As time passed, Allied crews learned. They studied the Tiger's weaknesses. They learned that its turret turned slowly. They learned that its sides and rear were vulnerable. They learned that mobility and teamwork could overcome heavy armor. American tank crews, for example, developed tactics to outmaneuver heavier German tanks. They didn't try to duel them head-on if they could avoid it. They used speed and numbers. Soviet crews did the same. They swarmed. They flanked. They used artillery. The Tiger was dangerous, but it wasn't unbeatable. And here's something else. It was complicated. The engine was powerful on paper, but it struggled with the tank's weight. The transmission needed careful handling. The overlapping road wheels, which looked so impressive, could clog with mud and freeze in winter conditions. It demanded maintenance. It demanded fuel. It demanded trained crews. Meanwhile, the Allies were producing thousands upon thousands of simpler tanks. They focused on reliability and numbers. This created a strange contrast. Visually, the tiger looked unstoppable. Strategically, it was limited. And that contrast actually makes the design story even stronger. Because even when the tiger wasn't dominating the battlefield, it still dominated the imagination. Think about that. Even after experienced crews learned how to fight them, even after mechanical problems became known, even after the war ended, the tiger's image remained powerful. That means its impact went beyond battlefield results. It became symbolic. And symbols are powerful. The tiger symbolized German heavy armor. It symbolized danger. It symbolized technological strength. It didn't matter that there were fewer than 2,000 of them built. It didn't matter that most German armored vehicles were actually Panzer IVs or Stu-GS. In the mind of many Allied soldiers, the tiger became the face of German armor. That's why misidentifications were so common. Under stress, soldiers would report tigers when they had actually seen other vehicles. It wasn't stupidity. It was human nature. When you know the enemy has a monster, your brain starts seeing that monster everywhere. Every large shape in the distance. Every heavy silhouette through smoke. Tiger. The shape had burned itself into memory. And that memory changed behavior. Units would slow down if they believed tigers were nearby. They would call for air support. They would adjust their approach. Sometimes that caution was necessary. Sometimes it wasn't. But the shape had already done its work. Now let's zoom out even further. Why does this matter today? Because the tiger shows us something about design that goes beyond tanks. When you build something with strong, clear geometry, people react. Hard lines communicate strength. Flat surfaces communicate resistance. Mass communicates power. Look at modern armored vehicles today. Many of them have sharp angles and aggressive lines. That's not only about function. It's also about image. Look at certain SUVs on the road, boxy, squared off, wide stance. They project toughness. Compare that to a rounded family car designed for efficiency. The difference is obvious. You feel it before you think about it. The tiger did that decades ago. And here's something interesting. The tiger doesn't look complicated or flashy. It's not covered in extra details. It's not curved or futuristic. It's simple. And that simplicity is part of its strength. A flat front plate. A box turret. A long straight barrel. A wall of wheels. That's it. But those elements combine into something unforgettable. When you stand in front of a tiger in a museum, you're not thinking about logistics or production numbers. You're not thinking about fuel shortages in 1944. You're reacting to shape and mass. You're reacting the same way soldiers did, even if your situation is very different. You might not feel fear. But you feel weight. You feel seriousness. You feel something solid. And that's why the tiger's look has survived every argument about its performance. People debate its reliability. They debate whether it was worth the cost. They debate whether it was a strategic mistake. But they don't debate the silhouette. The silhouette won. And that tells us something powerful. The engineers at Henschel were not trying to create an icon. They were trying to create a heavy tank that could survive enemy fire and carry a powerful gun. They chose flat plates because they were practical. They chose vertical walls because they needed space. They chose wide tracks and overlapping wheels to handle weight. All practical decisions. But those practical decisions accidentally created one of the most intimidating shapes in military history. That's the part that makes this story special. The menace wasn't designed. It was a byproduct. And sometimes, the strongest design statements aren't the ones planned in advance. They're the ones that come from solving real problems in the most direct way possible. The tiger was built to survive. Surviving just happened to look like that. Now let's bring everything together. Strip away the myths. Strip away the internet arguments. Strip away the hero stories and the hate stories. What's left? A machine made of steel plates, built under wartime pressure, designed to carry a powerful gun and protect its crew. That's it. And yet, somehow, that machine became one of the most recognizable military shapes in history. That doesn't happen by accident very often. When you stand in front of a real Tiger tank today, something clicks. Even if you don't know its history. Even if you don't care about World War II. Even if you've never read a single book about tanks. You still feel it. The flat front plate rises in front of you like a wall. The turret sits heavy and squared off. The gun stretches forward in a straight, confident line. The overlapping wheels form a dense band of metal along the bottom. There's no softness. No curve to ease the eye. No visual escape. It feels solid. Final. Immovable. And that feeling is powerful because it's simple. The Tiger doesn't try to impress you with complexity. It doesn't look delicate. It doesn't look refined. It looks like it was carved from a block. That kind of visual honesty sticks in the mind. Over time, the Tiger's image grew bigger than the machine itself. Movies helped. Video games helped. Model kits helped. Stories from veterans helped. But all of that only worked because the original shape was already strong. If the Tiger had looked ordinary, it wouldn't have become a legend. It would have been just another heavy tank in the history books. Instead, it became the symbol. Think about how many tanks existed in World War II. Thousands upon thousands. Most of them are forgotten outside of specialist circles. But say the word Tiger, and people picture something immediately. Boxy. Wide. Long gun. Heavy. That mental image is clear. And clarity is power. The strange thing is that the Tiger's intimidating look wasn't planned as a psychological weapon. The designers weren't sitting around thinking about how to scare enemy soldiers visually. They were thinking about armor thickness, gun mounting, engine power, interior space, production limits. They were solving engineering problems. Flat plates were easier to manufacture. Vertical sides gave more room inside. Wide tracks were needed to handle weight. A large turret ring was required for the 88mm gun. Each decision made sense on its own. But together, they created a shape that feels dominant. That's the accidental genius of the Tiger. It shows how design can create emotion even when emotion wasn't the goal. It also shows how humans react to form before we react to facts. You can know that the Tiger broke down often. You can know that it was expensive. You can know that it was produced in small numbers. And still, when you see one, you feel something. That reaction comes before logic. That's what makes it interesting. In the end, the Tiger tank wasn't just a weapon. It became an idea. An idea of heavy armor. An idea of battlefield dominance. An idea of something that doesn't back down. And ideas can outlast reality. 80 years later, long after the engines have gone silent and the battles have ended, the shape still works. It still communicates strength without speaking. It still makes people pause. That pause is the proof. Not because the Tiger was perfect. Not because it won the war. But because its design tapped into something basic in how we see the world. Hard angles feel strong. Mass feels powerful. Flat walls feel unbreakable. The Tiger combined all of that in one machine. It wasn't designed to intimidate you. It was designed to survive. Surviving just happened to look like a moving fortress. And that fortress shape is why, even today, the Tiger tank doesn't just look like history. It looks like presence.